Hey everyone, today we're going to be looking at the most common mistakes made in-game. These are trends that I've noticed from coaching my students at every ELO, so hopefully everyone can take away something from today's video. Let's jump into it. The first mistake is not having a plan for each wave, and the reason that it is so important to have a plan for each wave is for two main reasons. The first is that fundamentally the game revolves around waves. And secondly is that the game is very chaotic, especially for people who aren't at the highest rank. And so being able to chunk up the game into these sections of waves, these bite-sized pieces for you to digest can just make the flow of the game a lot smoother. So instead of loading into the game and just kind of going with the flow, seeing what the enemy does, seeing what your ADC does, what you can do instead is make a plan for each wave in front of you so that you have an idea of what to do. And that gives you some control over how the game is going to play out. This not only increases your focus in the game, giving you something to actively work on, keeping you engaged, but it also reduces at the same time autopiloting. If you don't really know what you're doing, you're just going to be more likely to do random things or just be a very reactive player and just hope that you get gifted a free win. Having some structure to begin with is going to help a lot, and then you can adapt on top of that as the game goes. And I know that having a plan for each wave is much easier said than done, but I want to stress that just having a plan, whether it's a good plan or a bad plan, is really important, because this is the only way that you're going to improve at making plans, if you actively commit to a plan. And then if you make a bad plan, you can see how that bad plan plays out and then learn from that and make a different plan in a similar situation next time, and if you make a good plan that works out, then you're like, okay, great, I will keep doing that. I don't want to spend too long discussing how each plan can look like, but you mainly want to choose between three main decisions for a wave. You either want to crash the wave, build a slow push, or to freeze it. And the plan that you do make, if you can tie it into your champ's identity or the game state so that it makes sense, that's going to go a long way. You're not obviously just randomly choosing a plan. So let's say you're an enchanter and you're versus an engager. They have a lot of all-in. So your plan heading into the game is just to try and hold freezes. And then whenever a wave does come out onto the map, you're like, okay, I want to keep this wave frozen on my side of the lane. And so maybe that means sometimes you need to trim the wave a little bit so they don't build a huge wave and crash it. Maybe that means sometimes you need to ping your ADC off so that you can just maintain this freeze on your side of the lane. Maybe another situation is you're versus an enchanter, just picture this as a Janna or something, and then your plan is to push, to crash, to play that Perma War of Attrition. And then each wave that comes out, you're actively looking to hit. And even before the next wave is in your lane, their wave is coming along here, and you're right here, and you're ready to shove the wave. And having that plan as fast as possible and committing to it is just going to allow you to dictate the pace of the game. The last example I want to talk about for having a plan for each wave is, let's say that your ADC is here and he's dealing with the stacked wave under his tower, and you're kind of parting out of base and just keeping an eye on what's happening bot, and then you see the crashed wave over here and the next waves are coming in, and so you make a plan to slow push. You don't want to run straight bot and immediately start to hard shove. So if your plan is to slow push, then there's no reason to be bot on that wave, right? You're just going to pressure the map as much as possible, play around this area, and then the next wave that comes out of your base, then that's the one. When it meets up, you're going to look to crash that. And so you pressure, you eventually roam back down, and then you crash that wave. And so in that situation, you're not just kind of autopiloting, piloting bots straight from base, hanging around, not really doing too much. The more that you can make a plan in advance, then just the whole experience, the whole early game is going to be a lot smoother for you. And I think this is quite a reasonable objective to have, because there is so much time between waves for you to formulate a plan for them. And there is going to be downtime when you're not constantly fighting the enemies, to have a think about what you should realistically be doing with the wave. The next mistake is not pathing between mid and bot from base. What happens a lot of times is that my students just pass straight bot from base without thinking at all about where the best place to path is. And so you don't always want to path bot, right? Sometimes you want to path mid if your bot wave state allows you to roam. Check out my roaming guide for these windows. But a lot of the times you do want to pressure around mid instead of bot. Maybe you want to link up with your jungler around here. And pathing between mid and bot, pathing through this base gate, allows you to be in a position to react to a lot of things that might happen on the map. So maybe you're not sure if you want to be mid or bot, and so you're pathing between mid and bot, and you're kind of keeping an eye on what's happening around here, and then you see that eventually the enemy successfully crashes a wave, and now you don't want to path bot, so then you just start to path mid, right? Or you're pathing between mid and bot, you're keeping an eye on what's happening bot, and you see that they don't crash the wave fast enough, and your wave gets back to the lane now, and so now you can come back to lane and hold the freeze and punish them. That's just another example of where you would choose between mid and bot and maybe be in a position to be able to react. So pathing between mid and bot, this allows you to have more time to make the best decision, and it forces you to actively think about the game as well, which is always a good thing. Reducing autopiloting is very important. And I think this is quite a foreign skill for a lot of players, especially if they're playing enchanters, to roam and pressure the map a lot more. There are going to be windows in pretty much every game where you're not wanting to be bot the whole time, and you are going to have these windows where you just want to pressure the map as much as possible and then go about your decisions from there, and this can help to develop your skill of roaming and pressuring. Once again, I would encourage you to path between mid and bot and then make a decision between pressuring around mid or pressuring around bot for a window, see how that plays out, and then you can improve from there, and eventually hopefully you'll be able to make an optimal decision and pressure the map appropriately throughout the early game. The next mistake is not controlling around mid as the game progresses. And I have talked about this a lot in some of my other videos, but I'll quickly summarize why mid is so important. And it's for two main reasons. Obviously, it is in the middle of the map, so if you are controlling around mid, then you can react to either side of the map quite easily. And the second point is that middle waves, they crash first because the minions have less distance to travel, right? They pass straight here, whereas the minions on the side, they have a much longer distance to travel before they meet the other wave. And so that means that if you pressure mid, then you can get pressure here before there is pressure on the sides, and then translate that pressure towards the side, and then get practically two lanes of pressure on the same window. Now, why I say it is important to control more around mid as the game progresses is because of two main reasons once again. The first reason is that neutrals are starting to come up on the map, right? And they get more important as the game goes on because you're going to be stacking dragons, you're going to get closer to that Dragon Soul win condition. So like the fourth dragon, way more important than the first dragon. The same goes for Baron and Elder. And so very early on in the game, before there are any neutrals up, there is less incentive to control around mid because you can't use that pressure to translate that to a neutral. And the other reason why the scaling aspect is important is because after 14 minutes, plates go down. And so if you are pressuring more around mid and you allow enemies to get more pressure in the sides, they can't translate that to a huge gold lead by taking plates. So what I often see in my coaching is that my student will be doing a great job in the 2v2, but as the game progresses, the 8-minute mark comes along and then Herald is on the map. This area is still very dark. And so they need to be able to translate their pressure from bot and start to control around this area towards mid, even the bot river as well, so that they can start to pressure the map appropriately. The other example is if a student is losing bot 2v2 pretty hard and then they're just kind of AFK in that lane, not really doing anything, and this area remains dark, they allow the enemy to control this area, and in both situations, not controlling around mid, not going to be able to pressure the map and look for either denying or taking these neutral objectives for yourself. So I just want to give a quick example of what controlling more around mid as the game progresses might actually look like. Let's say it's 8 minutes in the game, you're coming out of base, and instead of just pathing straight bot, mindlessly dropping a ward in the lane bush or just the first kind of bush that you see, what you want to do instead is you recognize that the game is getting later, neutrals are starting to be on the map now, and so you're first going to path around here, and maybe you're going to control this pixel bush, maybe you're going to drop a trinket around here, maybe you can even help your mid laner comfortably get a wave of prio here, maybe you shove with them or you just heal them up, and then the side lane waves they're going to meet in the near future, and then you start to pass down there. And then you've been able to do some control around here. Maybe you've generated a wave of mid prio, and then that's going to allow your team a better control of the map. Just another quick example, maybe it's 14 minutes and onwards in the game now, and you have your completed support item and you have your sweeper, and you're going to be spending a lot more time around mid now. Maybe we're even in the mid to late, where the towers are down on the side, and so now you're just really playing around mid first, and you're sweeping around mid before you start to impact vision control around any type of area. And you are going to spend a lot less time around bot because you know that there is a cost for you being bot as the game progresses. You're not applying pressure towards mid, you're allowing the enemy to get mid, you're completely sacking one side of the map because you're so far away from it. And so this is another point of, how to not autopilot. You don't just not autopilot, you do something, you're actively thinking about something. And the concept of thinking about controlling around mid as the game progresses is going to give you that structure to pressure more appropriately. And the last mistake is not knowing about base timings. And so this is going to be a little bit more of a specific point for today. So the best time to get a base off is crashing a stacked wave. And so when you're ahead, you'll have that luxury to manipulate the wave how you want, and then you can stack a wave, crash a stacked wave, and then reset. And so obviously you would just be actively hard shoving a wave. You're not just kind of hanging around, you're shoving a wave and then you're looking to base after a stacked wave has crashed. So I don't normally have too many issues with that one. It's just on the flip side, when you're behind, when you're losing, and then people can get stuck in the lane for way too long and they don't recognize the best time to base when you're losing. And so the answer for that one is to base after the enemy has crashed a wave into your tower. So picture this is the enemy bot lane, this is your ADC, they have just crashed a wave. And so if you don't base after they have crashed a wave, then you're just going to never base, right? They're just going to crash another wave. You're stuck in a tower, they're going to crash another wave. And so the idea is that you base and then you come back to lane and you get your gold, you get full health, full mana, and then maybe you can start to pressure the 2v2 lane again. And the reason that you base on this window is because you can ensure that your ADC can collect the wave, whether it's one wave or a stacked wave. You can help them last hit under tower, typically on the melee minions, and then you can channel your base once they're just range minions. Maybe you can deter the enemy from hitting your tower as well, and also ensure that your ADC doesn't get dove on a stacked wave. But then once it is apparent that your ADC is going to collect the stacked wave, you base, you come back, and then you can start to try and pressure once again. If you base too early before they crash a wave, then you're going to be off the map, and then they're going to crash a stacked wave, and then maybe they can get several plates, or maybe they can zone your ADC off of the stacked wave, or maybe they can even dive your ADC. Remember, this is a situation where you're losing, so you're in a weaker matchup, and I'm assuming that you guys are chunked out as well. So to quickly summarize these 2 points, when you're ahead, base on crashed waves to the enemy tower. When you're behind, base when the enemy crashes a wave under your tower. And I do briefly want to mention tempo when you're basing. So let's say you make a decision to crash a wave really fast and then look to base and recall. You're going to base. You want to obviously base as fast as possible. And so what you don't want to have happen is that you crash a wave and then you recall in a greedy location and they come back to lane and then they cancel your recall. You're going to have to assess what the enemy tempo looks like, how likely it is that they can move forwards and just cancel your base. And so this is going to be different in each situation, but just make sure that you understand the importance of basing without getting your base cancelled. On the flip side, let's say you're basing on that crashed wave that we talked about. You base and then they're staying in lane and they shove another wave and then you come back to lane and then you know that they're low health, low mana, and they have a lot of gold to spend, so they're just going to run back here and base. You can run straight past your ADC, straight past the wave and be as annoying as possible. Try to cancel these bases, because if you do, then that gives you another whole wave with which you can do whatever you want with before they can even base and come back to lane, which can be very important in a losing matchup. Sometimes every wave that you get control of and get access to can be extremely relevant in how the game plays out. If you know what you want to do with the wave, if you know that you're going to crash this in base, then you're using all of your abilities to crash a wave, and you're auto-attacking and then you're basing a lot faster than just hanging around and then eventually realizing, okay, maybe I should be basing here. Sometimes what I see is that you get a window to base, you have a lot of gold and you don't really want to hang around in the lane for too much longer, but then the ADC and yourself start to just hit the tower and you try to get a plate, but then the enemy comes back to lane and now you have to find a base and you're just going to lose an entire wave that they shove and all of your tempo is just ruined from overstaying and trying to hit the tower. Sometimes you don't even get the plate. And I would say that this is a little bit more prevalent in lower elos, to be hitting the plates and trading your tempo for that. A general rule of thumb is to not go for any plates before your first base. Obviously, this is going to be situation dependent. And the last point I want to make about base timings is that before your first base, what you typically want to do is to not hold a freeze and then base after holding a freeze. You want to get as much golden experience as possible. And so if you can crash a wave instead of just holding a freeze and basing, then it's great. And the reason that it is important before a first base is because XP is more important when you are lower level, right? If you hit level 2, if you hit level 3, those are huge spikes. Whereas if you're later on in the game, you just get a little bit of experience from this wave, it's not really going to mean much. And the other reason is that maybe there was a fight and you kill the enemy bot lane, and then you don't really have that much time before they come back to lane because respawn timers are short in the early game. And so let's say you try to hold a freeze and then you base, but they're coming out really fast and then they just crash your freeze and then you lose a bunch of minions. Whereas if you shove that wave out, then you're not going to lose any minions that way. Thanks for watching. I hope one or several of these points resonated with you. Please consider liking and subscribing, but only if you enjoyed this content. And consider joining my Patreon for School of Support coaching, for answers, for VODs, for educational content and more. Or consider applying for my individual session and also my School of Support Discord community. The links for all of these are going to be in the description below as usual. And I want to give a shout out to all of my current students in honor rolls who helped me to do all of this full time. Thanks again for watching and goodbye.